everybody. Welcome back to our pathway on coaching around curricular resources. I really appreciated everyone's active engagement in our fun activities yesterday and your good thoughts and comments, both in the session and on our Post-its. We have online Post-its and we have Post-its in the four corners of the room with questions and challenges and things that you're excited about. That feedback was very helpful. We will be addressing a lot of those challenges over the course of the whole year rather than just today. But there were two things that came up that I wanted to address right away. One is the question about the rubrics. We are talking about curricular rubrics today. We are talking about how you can adapt and modify. Like, we're going to talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages of different curricular rubrics that exist. And then also some of the research findings that have come out of studies that have tried to use those rubrics or some of the same research frameworks. But the goal of this pathway is not to create a rubric. So if you're in a district or working with districts that have already done that work, that doesn't mean your time is wasted in here. That's a means to the end, right? Not the end. So it's sort of like teaching the alphabet, right? We're not going to stop at teaching the alphabet. We're going to go and teach you how to read. So the rubric is a tool for thinking about the different things that you and your districts want in the curriculum and identifying things that are not working or might not work or might cause problems in your particular district. And the ultimate goal is to then help us to work together to solve those challenges. And we're going to be talking through some of those examples and start brainstorming on some of those examples today and tomorrow. So if you already have one and you don't want to create one and you don't want a rubric, that doesn't mean you're in the wrong room. It's still okay if you feel like you're in the wrong room. But I think you're allowed to switch, but I didn't want anyone to think that that's what we're going to spend a whole year doing. The other thing that came up is that some of you are very excited about meeting coaches that are working with similar curricula or some of the same curricula or curricular resources and doing work in those groups and having almost like a breakout within the breakout. And we are excited about doing that. We're going to be collecting information from you tomorrow as part of our wrap-up activities so that we can identify the places where you feel like you could use the most support, the resources that are being most frequently used or most frequently causing problems, and sort of looking for places where those groups could be formed and resources could be shared and insights shared across. So those two comments, thank you very much. That is going to help us shape our pathway forward. So with that being said, we'll go ahead and dive in today. Our agenda, we have an agenda, and I'm hitting the button. It's supposed to make it advanced. Do I need to? Did it work? Okay, yeah. Our agenda today, it looks like a lot. So if we don't get to all of it, that's okay, because we are meeting right back here in this room at 8:30 tomorrow, so we can just pick up where we left off. But we're going to start by digging a little bit deeper into Sharon Walpole's article and reflecting on it. And unpacking some of the pieces of it. That's going to be an anchor text for us as we move through the year. We're going to talk about it tomorrow also. And then we're going to strengthen our knowledge about what we mean by high-quality instructional materials or curricular resources, look at the curricular landscape in Michigan as a whole, and then dig into some of the rubrics that are out there that are frequently used to review curricula. And so we'll be doing some of that in small group work today, and if we run out of time, tomorrow morning. So we're going to start by turning to each other and doing some talking about what stood out to you in your reading, just reflecting on the reading in general. We'll dig more deeply into it. But what stood out to you? What pieces connect with discussions you've had or work that you've done? And how might you use this article in your work as a coach? Or do you see yourself using it as a coach or just guiding your work as a coach? So we'll do a few minutes in your tables. If you aren't, by the way, if you're in a new table with people you don't know, introduce yourselves first, and then dive into the reflection. On Zoom, you can do this via, you can respond to these questions via chat and have a large group chat. Okay, so I am going to make you share out later. But I'm going to this was just a group reflection. I'm not going to make the groups share out at this point. But we are going to dig in a little bit more deeply. See, I'm remembering to hit it, to actually do it today. and yet it's not always working. Aha. Okay, so we're going to dive into our strengthening knowledge section. And looking at this anchor text more closely, we're going to take it a section, sort of a piece by piece. Yesterday, we talked about some of the lessons from Reading First and the research that's been conducted since Reading First that can inform our work. And positive models for curriculum coaching and positive models for curriculum coaching. Tomorrow, and maybe today, maybe tomorrow, we're going to be talking more about the attention to equity and the enabling conditions. But today, I want to dive into defining and choosing high-quality instructional materials, what she means by that and what we mean by high-quality instructional materials, and also the theory of change. So high-quality instructional materials are things that align to research standards and equity. We can't leave any of those pieces out. And they support teachers in enacting evidence-based practices. So we want to look at things that are usable for teachers, that they like, that they feel are useful and helpful for their students. And this includes, a high-quality instructional material is going to include support for both content and pedagogy, incorporating what we know about best teaching practices in reading. For example, explicit instruction and gradual release of responsibility. And so we're going to, but there are lots of issues around defining this term. Not everyone is in agreement about what a high-quality instructional material is. Dr. Walpole talks about different perspectives and different rubrics that exist, and we're going to dig into those a little bit more later. But not everybody has access to these high-quality instructional materials. Some of them are quite expensive, and you're often not, and districts don't always have the ability to purchase the things that they want. And then finally, they're not always aligned to all the things that your district cares about. So I wanted to share a little bit about what the curricular landscape looks like in Michigan, because I think that's important for us to understand what most teachers are working with. So there was a report from EPIC that actually Dr. Tanya Wright authored or led a few years ago, looking at what curricular resources elementary teachers use for English language arts instruction. And I thought it was full of interesting insights, most of which will not be surprising to you, but sort of highlight the challenge of this work. So first of all, they found that 60% of districts did mandate some sort of literacy curriculum or curricular resources. Only a third did not mandate any. So some of this is not up to individual teachers, and depending on the district, you may or may not, as a coach, have a role in this. Most districts do say that coaches have a role in choosing the curriculum. I think it was 72% said that you, literacy coaches, have a role in picking the curricular materials, but obviously school leaders, teachers, central office, all of those other groups have as much or more influence, and then there's also the district boards and other administrators at the ISD that also have influence. And, random parents. I was involved in my role as a parent rather than a researcher in making this decision in East Lansing. One thing that I thought was also important for us to keep in mind as we undertake this work is this statistic, which is that 60% of districts said that they had changed their literacy curricula or curricular resources. Remember, we can talk about both, and we'll talk about that distinction a little bit more, in response to the Read by Grade 3 law. So that's since 2015. So it's not even 10 years now. 60% of grade, 60%, maybe it was 2016, 60% of districts have already made some sort of big change in response to policy. And I think, and you can see that it's above 50% at almost every type of district broken out. So teachers have recently gone through a big curricular change around reading, and now we're sort of enacting another wave of those changes. See here. Something that's that's interesting is that 464 different curricula and curricular resources were reported. That's a lot of different things. That includes 170 different core English language arts curriculum. So when we talk about a core curriculum, something that's supposed to encompass all the areas of reading instruction. So something that you would use for your whole literacy block, for example, like a basal or a full or EL education, something like that. However, they do note in the report that what you and I might think of as a core curriculum, that might not be what all the teachers were reporting. So for example, things like teachers pay teachers was showing up as a core curriculum, which is a surprising choice, and other things that were not necessarily listed by the publishers as a core curriculum. So some of these things may not meet our definition of core curriculum, but that's how the teachers themselves were thinking about it. And then they mentioned an additional 128 resources that they use to support writing instruction, separate from their core curriculum. An additional 166 resources to support phonics or spelling instruction, things like foundations, words their way, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of stuff in the mix. There's a lot of ingredients out there. But when we actually look at the totals, the number of curricula, and this is, this report came out a couple years ago, so it's reporting data, pre-pandemic for the most part. But we look at what's actually being used, there's some familiar names at the top of that chart, right? So we're talking about 31% of teachers reported using Fontes and Pinnell as one of their curricular resources, followed by the Mesa units of study, Lucy Calkins units of study, Reading Street, Journeys, Jan Richardson resources, Wonders, Expeditionary Learning, Core Knowledge, and Engaged New York. So those were the top 10, and 86% of teachers used at least one of those. So that's a lot. This is the landscape that teachers were reporting just a few years ago pre-pandemic. Of these, and again, I'm not pro or against any of these. I'm not here to be that person, but only 3 of them have been highly rated by exterior sources and using rubrics that assess how well they meet English language arts standards. So it's not to say that the other ones don't, but only 3 of them have actually been sort of endorsed by outside groups. And again, only with alignment to standards, not necessarily the research base or the other things that we care about. So there's a lot of work to be done around curricular support here. I would not be surprised if more of them are starting to make changes. I know just anecdotally that many districts are making changes in response to the pandemic and pandemic funding. But then finally, I think another thing that's really relevant to your work here is that the average teacher reported using 3 different curriculum resources to teach reading, including more than 1 core reading program. So if the whole idea is that your core reading program is supposed to fill up your block, the fact that the average teacher is using 1.5 core reading programs indicates that the teachers see the problem, right? They understand that they're not getting everything that they need out of one curriculum. And then they also report, 50% of teachers reported using 2 or more additional curriculum resources besides their core program. So there's something going on already where teachers are aware that there are holes and gaps and things that they're missing, and they're going out and finding things, either at the individual level, the building level, the district level. So this results in what I call a Franken curriculum, right? You've got, things going on over here with your phonological awareness in tier 1, then you might have a tier 2 curriculum that talks about some, to support kids who need extra help, that talks about all those things using completely different terms, right? You might have like silent E over here and magic E over here, and you have lots of things repeated or things that are being left out altogether because these are not really, teachers are doing their best to kind of cobble together resources. And this chart over here is really fascinating also. 43% of teachers reported using 2 or more core reading curriculum in their day. So I think that what we can see here is that a lot of teachers are open to modifying, adapting, and addressing the weaknesses in their curriculum and should be open to some support around that and trying to make those curricular resources work better together. So that's what the landscape in Michigan. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Is anybody surprised? Anybody surprised by these findings? Anybody feel like this sounds very familiar? Okay, that's good. Yeah, I wasn't that surprised either, but it was nice to have it sort of in black and white, or green and white in this case. Okay, let's see if we can advance. Why doesn't this work? All right, so going back to our anchor text, one thing that Sharon Walpole talks about is, getting the right materials in teachers' hands, right? We want high quality instructional materials, and that includes both core curriculum and supplemental materials as they're used. But that's just the beginning of the journey, right? Finding the right materials and getting those. She posits a theory of change, and she says that instructional materials have to be embedded within a theory of change that get us from HQIM, is what she called adoption, high quality instructional material adoption in the upper left-hand corner of the schematic, all the way across to student achievement. And there are lots of things between the materials and student achievement. So I wanted to give you a chance to reflect on where you as a coach exist in this theory of change, right? There's all of these different pieces that have to be in place, and enabling conditions, which we'll talk about more later, that will allow for anything to happen to kids, right? Like just picking something and spending money on it, and children's experience changing. Those are two things that are pretty distal from one another. So turn and talk at your tables, or in the chat. You can chat about this and see where in this theory of change, under enabling conditions, teacher use of challenging lessons, and teachers' pedagogical content, knowledge, equitable beliefs and practices, and self-efficacy, where you think you, as a coach, have some leverage to influence the connections. And we will share out after this. Okay, let's have some groups share out. I think we often think about curriculum, it's all about the choosing and the adoption, but there are many different places where you, as and literacy coaches are involved in that, but where do you see your points of influence, maybe in this upcoming year, being most relevant, beyond, including adoption, but way beyond that? Who wants to? Annie will come around and let people share out.
No? I really want the opportunity to do like an Ellen DeGeneres right now. No one? No one? Oh. Okay. Oh, Cheryl, were you going to say something? Okay. This is good. I even get to run. Mm-hmm.
So at our table, we talked about, I know that, we took the liberty of moving the boxes, right? So we decided to shift school level norms out and then pull enabling conditions down so that it's kind of more linear, so that the school level team, right, the leadership team is where coaches really need to insert themselves in those decision-making processes, because really it's the school leadership teams that are making the decisions that impact the enabling conditions in the first place.
Very interesting that you said that, because at one of the tables I was at, one of the coaches very well advocated for herself to become a member of the school leadership and school improvement team, which is sometimes the challenge, right? If you don't have a seat at the table, all these things happen. So great note. Yes. Okay, I'm coming, Rebecca. I didn't see you yet.
We had some really rich conversation here because we've been really deep in this work for the last, 4 years. So we start with summiting with those school level norms. We get the leadership behind us. We have really strong protocols for the adoption process and who should be involved in that adoption, so that everyone has a voice in the end in some form or another, and we have a kind of a blind voting at the end, and it's counted in front of everyone, the entire staff. The pedagogical content, knowledge, equitable beliefs, practices, that I almost feel like it should be the watermark, right? Because in order to buy into some shifting in these really more rigorous type instructional practices, we got to be chipping away at equitable beliefs and their practices, but you can't download it to them. So it's work with them, give them high-level practices so that they're empowered by the practice, not embarrassed by the practice. We unpack the content, we build that into slide decks so that they don't lose it, and we keep building and building and layering pedagogical knowledge, evidence-based resource over the resource, always the resource at the core. Through that, relationships with their students start to build because they're empowered, kids are empowered. Now we have more pedagogical content that's a higher outcome, so that outcome keeps building over time. Student achievement is measured first at the classroom level, and we are still waiting for that big distal measure of M-STEP, right? So that's that final piece, but we keep all of our PD, all of it goes back to that curricular resource once it's high quality. But through the previous resource, on our old school resources, we use that pedagogical content to help discern how weak their current resources. So that's where we're at.
I love so many things about that. Because you're right. When you have a weak curricular resource at the heart, then your pedagogical content is about balancing it, right? And like working around it and like support and like kind of filling in those gaps and curriculating them around. And then when you have a strong one, you almost have to like reverse the polarity, right? And you're like, no, now we like it, right? Now we want you to see how it overlaps with your pedagogical knowledge. We actually, the two things aren't at odds as much anymore. Sometimes they will still be at odds. But so now that we can take, I almost feel like we're putting more and more pressure on teachers all the time to like improve things and add things and like what you need to be able to tell them that you have introduced something that's high quality, and not that everyone can or does or have, but is that they can take a little bit of that pressure off themselves because they can trust the material. But that's a really hard turn if that wasn't what you were doing before, and if you've been given things over and over again that you saw firsthand needed to be changed or adapted along the way. So I really love that. Did anybody else want to speak to this before we move on? I thought I saw one more hand. Nope, someone's just scratching. Okay, all right, let's keep going. But what I really wanted to highlight about this theory of change is all of that, all of that work that is built around helping your instructional materials make a difference in kids' lives. Everything from how you might be involved in curricular training to making sure that teachers find time for all the different pieces in the curriculum. This was a big deal with the bookworms adoption, was there are 3 different 45-minute blocks. Where do those fit around recess? Where do they fit around lunch? Like even just that sort of logistical planning. Figuring out what to do with the kids who are not in your small group if you're doing the differentiated reading instruction. What are they doing? How do you keep them from interacting? Scheduled time for professional collaboration to talk through some of the issues. Those are all levers that you can be involved in as coaches, as well as, of course, using challenging, the teacher use of challenging lessons for students, collaborative instructional culture, and building up that pedagogical content knowledge to allow them to effectively use the material. So all of those things, almost that whole I kind of see that whole diagonal as our area of practice. So we're going to keep talking. So with that said, I wanted to highlight that before we moved into talking about rubrics, because again, we always think the rubrics are about instructional, material adoption or curricular adoption or selection. But what we really need is tools that help us find out where that challenging work needs to happen with our teachers. So we're going to look briefly at 3 rubrics. We also have another 4th one that we will share later. But basically, these are commonly used to evaluate curriculum. You may see these online when you look up a curricular resource to see if you want to use it or not. And so I think it's useful to think about what these do and don't offer us from a position of coaching. So the first one is the Ed Reports review criteria. I'm sure you've heard of Ed Reports. Any curricular resource that you might buy, you'll be able to look up your Ed Reports reviews. Dr. Walpole has concerns about ed reports, and you can find her thoughts about that online. But the important thing to know is that it really was designed to figure out who was moving towards the Common Core, right? We have to remember the political context of the Common Core state standards and those shifts that we asked teachers to make 13 years ago now. And so it's in some ways, this really is about whether or not you can find that these, the curricular materials are aligned to the standards, and they're very standards focused, sort of like the EQUIP rubric that Dr. Walpole mentions in the article and that we'll look at later. So it's very, the ELA rubrics are all about those shifts around text quality and complexity, and tasks grounded in evidence, and building knowledge with text, vocabulary, and tasks. It does also highlight usability for teachers. What it doesn't do necessarily is dig really deeply into the research base or highlight evidence-based practices. Then there's the Reading League curriculum evaluation guidelines. These are very popular now in the current movement, and they really take a theoretical approach based in the simple view of reading, right? There's the word recognition component, there's the language comprehension and reading component. Oh, I forgot to advance, sorry. And then there's the writing component. And they look for very specific things in each of these buckets. So phonological awareness and phoneme awareness, phonics and phonics decoding, fluency, background knowledge, vocabulary. And so they're really looking for these particular things that are evidence-based to pop in the curriculum. And then there's the IES rubric. There's one for K2 and one for 3-5. And this is very, very closely related to research. This is sort of all the way on the other end of the scale. If we think about one being more, the ed reports rubric being more focused on standards, the IES rubric is really, really focused on evidence alignment. Sort of like what Nell does for our literacy essentials, where she can go into the background and explain exactly how many studies and which studies tell you that this and that bullet point should be in there. That's what the IES rubric is like. It's like there's many, many studies backing up everything in that rubric. And it covers everything from foundational skills to writing development. And there's tons of research support, as I said, like it's really based in all the best evidence that we know. However, oh wait, one more thing, that's good, before I get to the however. It also highlights instructional design, including things like high quality evidence-based scope and sequence, goals and objectives, the way the lessons are organized, the way assessments are used and aligned, and then very clearly separates out and evaluates the content and the pedagogy. So not just what is taught, but how it's taught, including everything we know about the best ways to teach these things, like explicit instruction, systematic phonics, that kind of thing. Differentiation, that sort of thing. So great rubric overall. The issue is that there is a very elaborate process for using this to evaluate a curriculum. It's really almost more of a research tool than it is something that a district would use, especially to use to evaluate more than one curriculum. Basically, you're supposed to assign instructional materials to reviewers, determine inter-rater reliability. That's where you calculate statistically how close the evaluations are between the different members of your team, provide professional learning and practice to the reviewers just on using the rubric to review materials, develop a checklist of all the different materials to be reviewed to make sure they're consistent across programs. Basically, you need a whole team of trained reviewers, and it can take over 40 hours to review one set of curriculum materials. So this is not going to be plausible for many of our purposes. So while this is a quite good rubric and there's plenty of good information in there, it's not necessarily going to be practical for our purposes. So lots of issues. Curriculum review can be very labor intensive. All of these documents are fairly long and some are pretty unwieldy. They all have different score systems, which are hard to interpret and compare to one another. And most of them are focused on curriculum selection, or even like at a higher level, just like putting recommendations on a website, right? Like we want to score, Ed Reports wants to score everything and have like all these reports on the website so that you can just kind of quickly go and see what they're recommending. So it's not even necessarily about you using it for your own curriculum selection, but rather giving you input into your curriculum selection process. And again, they only address research, some better than others, sometimes standards, not the other things that we care about. So there's no perfect rubric, but I wanted to walk you through and kind of illustrate how these rubrics differ and how they may and how they can help us think about some of the problems or the issues that may arise with our curricular resources. Again, we're going to do our disclaimer. We're not endorsing any curricular products. We're not anti-endorsing. We're just highlighting, we're just talking about real curriculum because that's a way to keep this real with you. So we're just sharing our own experiences and not making claims about, what you use or how you're using it in your particular districts. But I want to dig into an example that I think a lot of people will be familiar with. How many of you are familiar with Heggerty phonemic awareness materials? Okay, that looks like almost everybody. Fantastic. The pandemic and the science of reading together kind of led to a big explosion in everybody knowing about Heggerty. I also put my kid in front of some of the Heggerty videos during the pandemic as he was in kindergarten. And so that became very popular. They made a bunch of materials and videos free during the pandemic to teachers and parents. And so that increased their popularity, plus the science of reading and the emphasis on phonemic and phonological awareness has made this, it's been around forever, but it's more popular than ever before. And so I know that there are districts who are trying to take steps towards being more aligned with the science of reading, and this is the first thing that they do, is that they purchase Heggerty, right? Because it's standalone, it's 15 minutes a day, it's very well guided for teachers, they can just do this and it's kind of isolated. It's like this little baby step towards including more foundational skills. So I've seen this a lot. And so I think it's a good example to look at how this a particular curricular. It's a good example that will highlight differences across the rubrics, right? So we're not necessarily evaluating Heggerty one way or the other, but thinking through the way different rubrics would think about this. So each rubric that we're talking about now has some specific requirements around phonemic and phonological awareness. So this is the Ed Reports rubric. Here is, I need to make this a little bigger for myself or get glasses, hold on. Slideshow, here we go. I don't know how well you can read it, so I need to make it bigger. Come on, come up bigger. Okay, so in Ed Reports, here's how they talk about phonological awareness for grades K and 1. The indicators are: materials have frequent opportunities for students to engage in phonological awareness activities during kindergarten and early grade 1. Materials provide explicit instruction in phonological awareness through systematic modeling across the K1 grade band. And materials provide practice of each newly taught sound, phoneme, and sound pattern across the K1 band. So quick turn and talk with your partners or chat. If you are familiar with Heggerty, and it seems like a lot of you are, how well does it meet these indicators? What do these indicators tell you about Heggerty and whether or not it's a good resource? All right, we won't share out, but thumbs up or thumbs down? How does Heggerty do, just general, how does it align with the Ed Reports rubric? Yeah, I think it's pretty good, right? I mean, it does have frequent opportunities. It does have systematic modeling. It does provide practice of lots of different sounds. So, some sideways too, right? Because it depends on what you mean by some of those terms, right? Well, let's keep going here. This is the Reading League rubric for phonological and phoneme awareness. Oh, sorry, I forgot to click this one. Hold on. This one's organized in terms, so that one each had indicators, and you would score each indicator 0 to 4. This one has red flags and practices aligned. So if there's a red flag, you want to make sure that's going to be like knocking points off. And if there are practices that are aligned, then that's positive. So practices that are not aligned, instruction attends only to larger units like syllables and rhyme without moving to the phoneme level. Instruction is focused on letters without explicit instruction and practice with the phonemes they represent. Phoneme awareness is not taught as a foundational skill. and phonological and phoneme awareness are not assessed or monitored. So those are the red flags. Those are the bad things that we don't want to find. Then the things that we do want to see is instruction includes larger units of phonological awareness, and at the beginning, at the beginning, in pre-K and the beginning of kindergarten, phoneme awareness is taught directly, explicitly, and systematically. Instruction includes conversations about the way the sounds are made in the mouth, articulatory gestures, and instructional focus on attuning students to all the phonemes in the words. So first, middle, and last. Okay, so turn and talk. How does Hegarty do on the Reading League rubric? Okay, thumbs up, thumbs down for Hegarty on the Reading League rubric. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Thumbs up. A lot of thumbs up, some sideways thumbs. I know our prior knowledge is sort of ruining this activity for us, right? Because we already have we suspect where this is going. But yeah, it's mostly okay. Like if you interpret it as like the letter of the law, it does not have those red flags. And it does have a lot of the practices listed here. Okay, now let's go to IES. Remember, IES is the one that is most deeply connected to the research base. It's quite different. Phonological, first of all, it separates out phonological awareness and phonics, and phonemic awareness. So instruction follows a progression to develop phonological awareness. And then phonemic awareness, instruction follows a developmental progression. For example, phoneme isolation, blending, segmentation, phoneme deletion, and then use with letters. Graphemes, letters are gradually integrated into the phoneme awareness instruction as students become more skilled. So those are the three things that we're looking for. All right, quick turn and talk about how Hegarty and based on what you know, does on the IES rubric. All right, thumbs up, thumbs down for Hegarty on the IES rubric. Thumbs up or thumbs down? Thumbs up, thumbs down. I'm seeing more thumbs down. I'm not seeing a lot of thumbs, actually. A lot of people are not weighing in. Thumbs down. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot more thumbs down, right? That letters piece is coming up again and again. We're going to talk about this again tomorrow with Tanya and I when we talk about Essentials 4 and 5. But incorporating letters and moving from sounds to letters is highlighted here in a way that it's not in the other rubrics, right? And so they're getting a little bit more, they're getting dinged for having more separate letter practice. We've already kind of talked about this, so I'll skip over that think, pair, share, because we've been doing this in partners. But if we go to the literacy essentials, and we turn our literacy essentials into checkboxes, just like the simplest possible rubric conversion, what we would look for is whether Hegarty emphasizes phonemic awareness, connects to letters, has explicit instruction, demonstration, play with sounds of words, and engaged study of words. So this is yet another way of thinking about this. So there are lots of different ways of looking at this, but there actually is a recent research study that dug into phonological awareness materials that were widely used in Utah. Now, I'm making a leap here and saying that one of these curricular materials is clearly Hegarty. They do the traditional research thing where they don't name the material that they're reviewing. But if you know Hegarty very well and you read the article, it is very clear that that is what they're talking about. And so they highlighted several recommendations from research, very well aligned to the IES rubric, and looked for those in these materials that were being used frequently in Utah, including the idea that phonological awareness should match students' orthographic development and move from easier to harder tasks. As soon as kids should work with letters during phonemic awareness instruction, and there should be an instructional focus on 1 or 2 phonemic awareness tasks, especially blending and segmenting, rather than 3 or more in any given lesson or day. That's not to say you can't do 3 or more over time. And what they found was, what they found is that this particular program introduced advanced tasks early in K and retained simple tasks throughout the whole year. So they didn't have that steady developmental progression. They were doing everything all at once, all the time. Letter sound relationships were taught separately using flashcards and letter cards, but not integrated into the phonological awareness activities. I mean, we don't know what program they're talking about, do we? They couldn't possibly start with an H and, oh, sorry, what? Oh, wait, sorry, wrong slide. Okay, thank you. Yeah, letter sound relation. And then there were 9 different phonological activities that were progressed through every day. What program could this be? Anyway, and that was way too many. And so they found that this really did not align, this program really did not align with the research base. So this is the kind of thing that will come up in your coaching, right? You'll have a material that your district has bought because they're ready to move towards the science of reading, and it's not exactly perfect, right? There are some things that are good, there are some things that are bad. What are some things that you can do as a coach in this situation? So we wanted to give you a little time to get out those notebooks that we gave and do some written reflection and sharing in your small group about how you might coach around a curriculum material like this, and what might be challenging about that. Any thoughts?
So make sure you get some time to write your thoughts before you share, so that way if people want to think about it, or sometime just jot them down, because all of you are very familiar with this. So now you all have this information, right, about this research study. So it might help you, you might be having to think about something, about how you might communicate, like what you know, based on what the research has found in the study.
Okay, all right. So I got a very good point of clarification, which is we are looking at rubrics here that are designed for whole curriculum, and we're just pulling out one little piece here. And so in some ways we are overrating a supplemental program by just looking at it as aligned to one piece, rather than what a high-quality instructional program would have all these parts integrated, right? In a really high-quality program, your phonological awareness and your phonics would align, right? And that would be something that you would look at and you would expect. A supplemental program, by default, can't align with the rest of your curriculum. And so I didn't want to imply that you could do this, that you could just use parts of the rubric. I just wanted us to have an example that I knew was familiar to everybody, that would highlight some of the differences across rubrics. So thank you for bringing that point. Also, apparently, I did not jump to too many conclusions. Somebody told me that the author of this RRQ study was on a podcast and admitted that it was, in fact, integrity. And so I wasn't wrong. But so I wanted to, this is the work. Right? This helping, it's not just, just throwing out Hegarty is not going to happen. It's very, very popular. Lots of districts just bought it. In fact, I have a funny story that I like to tell about how I met the district level, the district literacy director in one particular district, which will remain anonymous, which is that I got an email from a colleague that copied her. And it was like, hi, Mary Beth, not her real name. This is Dr. Laura Tortorelli, and she's going to tell you why you are wrong to be purchasing Hegarty. And I was like, hi. And she's like, it's too late, we already purchased it. I'm like, I know, it's okay, And so she and I sat down and actually had a lovely conversation about what to do once you've purchased Hegarty. In fact, we should maybe we should have a whole reading teacher article or something about this. So you've purchased Hegarty. What do you do now? And so basically what she said was that the teachers really didn't feel very comfortable teaching phonological awareness and phonics, and she saw this as a baby step, right? Again, baby's first phonological awareness curriculum, and that it was really supportive for the teachers, and they could see the kids doing it with them, and it was whole group and responsive, and that they really liked a lot of things about it. And so I worked with her to, use Hegarty as a stepping stone to get the phonological awareness and phonics routine built into the schedule, and then start to play around with that time a little bit once teachers got more comfortable. So one thing to do would be to choose just one of the 9 activities that is listed in any given day, and just go a lot deeper in those words, particularly thinking about where your kids are in their phonological awareness development, which set of skills do they really need to be working on right now, right? If it's the beginning of kindergarten or the end of first grade, that's going to be really different. And you might pull out a word list rather than starting at rhyme and going all the way through, blending, deletion and substitution. Picking the one that is most appropriate for where your kids are at and digging in a lot deeper and bringing in letters, right? Like working with those words using Alconin boxes or magnetic letters or writing on the board. So still using the curriculum to pick words for you and to pick that can be easily segmented and, and blended, but not doing everything all the time every day, and adding some more routine and practice and quality around those words. The other thing that we talked about doing was substituting in other phonological awareness and phonemic awareness activities during that time. So instead of doing Haggerty every day, pulling a phonemic awareness activity from the Florida Center for Reading Research website and playing a game, right? And just sort of mixing it up so that you are getting different things, developing what kids need, but not just doing the same oral recitation practice every day. So there are certainly ways that you can still support kids around, and teachers around using Haggerty, acknowledging some of its weaknesses. So that's my Haggerty example. As you recall, Annie brought in a example of a curricular resource, Wonders, that was not aligned with reading research, with writing research and best practices around writing research. And so she's going to talk a little bit about how she's done coaching to help bridge that gap around a different curricular resource.
It's funny because I was actually then thinking about, it was the same school with Wonders that when I started there, they had just purchased Haggerty. So this would have been 2016, and I was, doing essentials with them, K3, and the third grade teacher was like, well, we now have this like Haggerty that I'm doing every day. And it's very clear in the essentials that it talks about whole group in grades K and 1, and thereafter as needed. And so I was like, well, let's talk about it, So what do you think about that? So it's like just thinking about, you're going to run into this, just like Laura was saying, like either at the administrative level, like we're all in this room, it's so familiar to everybody, which tells us everyone's using it. So again, it's what I didn't say to that school was like, you should burn those books that you just spent the money on, right? I mean, like for many reasons I didn't say that. One, I think the principal and the board members would be like, she's not allowed in our school building anymore. But two, again, I think we talked about, we don't have to just be black and white, that gray in the middle, what's best, just as Laura talked about. And that's the same conversation I had with this teacher. So what's the evidence in your classroom? Like, do you have evidence that you need to be doing phonological awareness whole group for your third grade students? And she was like, I don't know. So I'm like, well, how could we find that out? So we kind of talked about, like, how do you even know what kids need at whole group? Yes, we're post-pandemic, so there very well may, sadly, be some areas within the band of phonological awareness development that some children are still needing instruction in. But 9 activities a day in third grade, whole class, seems quite unlikely that you're going to go through the whole gamut and spend that much time. And I'm really thinking in terms of what Dr. Duke said this morning, right? She already told us we're 2.5 hours short. According to all the different content areas, it told us how much we have to teach. So if we don't need to do an activity that takes 15 minutes, and really we only need 3 minutes of that, then we want to just steal back those 12 minutes because they're really important and our kids need us to teach them other things at that time. So it's not my Wonders example, but I just was thinking about it in terms of when I was in your shoes. And for some of you, I didn't have this research study to back me up. I just kind of was like, I'm going to say no based on what I know about research and the essentials. But now you have a research study that can back you up about having to have these tough conversations, which is hard. Which brings me to the other tough conversation that we had 4 years later in the same building. And it's actually a lovely building. These just happened to be things that really aligned well curriculum-wise, that for our talk here. Lovely teachers, miss working with them actually a lot, and really wish that the pandemic had not interrupted the work we were doing that I shared with you. Now, someone had emailed and asked me for access to this. So the the activity itself. So I actually linked that as a make a copy in the PDF. So if any of you want that, you can just make a copy, put whatever you want in it, whatever curriculum you're doing. If that's helpful, it's yours. And it also linked in, it's not showing on this, but it's in there. And the article is also linked in there if that's ever helpful for you to use as well. So we came around, we did this by grade level, like I was saying. And so I brought examples of how it went by grade level. So we took and compiled what the kindergarten teachers said. So, they did it individually, and then they handed them in to us, they did not have to put their names on them. And then we brought back to them, like, here's what you said as a team, right? And so it's probably a little hard to read. I'm doing the opposite of you. I'm going that way, but forgetting to go in this way. So you can see, like, when we were looking at kindergarten, nobody said it was all green, but we had a lot in yellow, and then we had some in red. And so this really brought along that conversation of we have some work to do. Now, as I said, the coach and I, we kind of already knew this walking into the room, right? But it's really hard to walk into a space and do that. And it's actually much better if you're engaging the people that you're working with to do the work and have to think it through, right? If they're engaged in it, they're actually understanding what you're asking them to do and think about. And hopefully this helps them in their practice when they go on Teachers Pay Teachers. Maybe it helps them to think about a process you would go through to vet a material. So one of the things that came out a lot was it wasn't really authentic or had really good, meaningful connections for kids when we think about Essential 1 and kids writing for multiple purposes. So I had added, multiple purposes is under Essential 1 in Bullet 4 and Essential 6 in Bullet 4, but also thinking, like, if you've studied Essential 1, you're knowing it should be real life, real world examples. So they were like, nope, that's not good. It felt like an incomplete process. It didn't feel like it was embedded. And they said teachers are not feeling really excited about the content of the curriculum, audience and purpose. There's a lot of copying. Oh, it's cut off there. But there's a lot of copying what's already in the book. And so as a writer, if you're a writer, which we all have to kind of be to be able to teach children to write, we use mentor texts, really important, right, to use a mentor text, but we don't just like copy that because it would be called plagiarism, right? So you can't just like copy it. And so like you're having these kind of really inauthentic ways of like, here's this model and we're only gonna use this model, when we kind of talked about other ways that we could do this. And I started to think about, oh, that went on the wrong page. But one of the things that came out of this, we're going to look at the rubrics, is that the rubrics were really misaligned. And so Dr. Lallier talking this morning, I was like, wow, this is great. She's also informing the things we're going to talk about later when she talks about some of the rubrics that were in there. So before we get into the rubrics, one of the pieces of their shared writing is that we started talking, it says like in this bottom part, read the final response as you track the print. If needed, write these sentence frames and model how to complete the first one using the notes. The black cricket blank, then blank. When Lance came back, blank. And we're trying to think like, would you have to like, maybe you did an interactive read aloud that day, and maybe there's a better like writing in response to reading that might work well for you, and maybe not just using sentence frames. We talked about using interactive writing as a way instead of just sentence frames. Now, certainly you're going to use sentence frames, but we really thought about if you have the opportunity as the teacher to be in front of the kids rather than doing just all sentence frame work, really like leveraging that whole writing process piece of like coming up with the idea together, thinking of the sentences that you're going to write, you writing it, them having boards in front of them, whiteboards, and or probably most people don't have chalkboards now, but them having notebooks, something that they could be writing in while you're doing it. So I'm going kind of a little bit fast because we're just running a little bit short. But then we did have some things with the rubric. So I just want to read the first, this is what you're checking off. You're starting kindergarten. Let's make it, okay. And sharing my work, writing and grammar. I wrote a personal narrative. Kindergarten. How do we feel about that? is it a problematic maybe to just say, I mean, I'm in a space of people, you all kind of get this, right? But for some of the teachers, they're like, well, yeah, I mean, they just have to check if they did it or not. And I'm like, well, you're 5, maybe 6. And it just as I wrote a personal narrative, like, I don't, do they know what that entails? Can they read this? Like, how are they accessing this rubric? Like, there were just so many questions. I thought, like, gosh, I wasn't giving first graders at the beginning of the year a rubric that looked like this with all these words. You know, I mean, you assume the kids are having help with this, right? But like kindergarten, yes, unit 4, kindergarten. However, let's think about what our goals for what children are like reading at the end of kindergarten. The word adjectives, I feel like is a pretty high level word that we're expecting that a kindergarten's reading at the end of kindergarten. So again, it's not that some of the things you wouldn't have, like, oh, do you want to have details? Like, we made a rubric up in our first grade team, and it was a pictorial rubric, right? And the kids knew what we meant by details, and they could like check it off, and they each actually had one. We made big copies for them, and then we made tiny copies of our writing stuff, and it was like in the corner of their desk, like just taped there. So whenever they were writing, they could just kind of look at it to be thinking about, oh, am I including like the W's? Am I checking off my details? But we built it together too. So the thing is that, do we want rubrics? Yes. Do all the programs that we purchase want to say, like, we're going to provide you with all these rubrics because we know rubrics are really important? That's part of their job so that you will buy it. But we also know that engagement motivation, right, a piece of that is having ownership and input into that. So if you can talk about an anchor text and talk about what makes a text really good, even if, let's say, you use the exemplar text and you're reading that aloud that came with the program, you can actually build a rubric with kindergartners and decide what that looks like. And they're actually probably going to remember it much more than you giving them a very text-dense set of print in a workbook that they're somehow supposed to be able to read and then self-reflect. And I mean, I wrote a personal narrative to a college freshman and be like, tell me about a personal narrative. What are the components of that, right? So anyhow, there's just kind of, I'm being a little bit probably snarky, too snarky at the end of day 2 right now. But, and again, it wasn't all bad, right? There were things that are good in there. And then the speaking and listening component, because you're doing like a partner share, you know, I spoke in a loud, clear voice. So that's, you know, we want to speak in a loud, clear voice. You know, I listened carefully. Like, there's a lot of like modeling, we hope, that went into that. Like, these are very clear things, but like, hopefully you modeled. Like, I didn't see a spot in the curriculum that actually said, this is what listening carefully looks like. You want to make sure that children understand what you mean by that term so that if they're going to check themselves off, and maybe there's like a, you know, a scale, you know, some days I listen better than others, right? I mean, there's just sort of different things. So anyhow, I know I'm kind of answering the questions and I apologize for that, but we went through and this is what we did as a group. And what I want to share with you is we're defining, I only brought out a couple of examples, but as we went through, we just found a lot of areas that were just sort of misaligned. And you will have these in yours, and hopefully it looks better on your PDF. It's like not quite showing exactly with the things I mixed. So if you find that the PDF has spaces missing, it's because I took it from a presentation. Just let me know and I will amend that. One of the ones that was really interesting, and I'm just going to tell you because I'm going to try and make sure and find it right here, but it was actually that the rubric didn't actually match the lessons that were taught within the unit. So that was really interesting. So I was like, I thought maybe I just had the wrong rubric. And I was like, this has to be the wrong rubric because there's no lessons that actually taught the pieces that are at the end of the rubric. But in fact, it was the right rubric. So there's also that. And so if you find that, I mean, what might you do if you have a curriculum? This is a 2020 version, so maybe by now it's been updated. It's 2020. No, it has not. Okay, confirmation, it's not updated. So what do we do? Maybe turn and talk about that. You are teaching a unit. The curriculum has given you a rubric, and the rubric, but the lessons that you do to teach up to the rubric don't align. So what might you do with the teacher that you're working with? Go to Teachers Pay Teacher. There you go, Teachers Pay Teachers. There you go, check. It would pop up, I'm sure, right? I think it probably did. What time are we doing? Bad? Oh, it's like time to end. Okay, well, you know. I know I'm rushing you because it's so late now, but does anyone want to say what they might do? Oh, you're going to van it? Okay, great. You can get volunteers.
Anyone want to share? Come on, you know you'd all just rewrite the rubric for them. Is that what you did? Any other suggestions?
I thought that might be a time to look at your standard and see, is it the rubric that's not aligned to the standard or the lessons that aren't aligned to the standard? And then think about making adjustments there.
Yeah, right. So, yeah, is anything aligned to the standards, in fact, right? So that's a really good question, because that's another thing, right? Sometimes you're like, I'm pretty sure that's not even a first grade standard. Like, why is this in the, right? So there's also that. There might be a really clear rubric, but maybe it's not actually for that grade level. There's that too. Okay, yeah, very good point. You can make your own rubric. Mm-hmm.
Talk me into it. So this past year, our district spent a lot of time working on, during the PLC time, developing the proficiency scales for each unit. And so anytime we were, in a conundrum as far as grading, it was, well, let's go back and determine, according to the essential standard, what was deemed as being proficient. And then whatever we listed as being proficient, that was a 3, and that was our rubric basically for scoring. It just kept us all on an even level every time we went through all of our ILC processes.
Yeah, so you kind of built in, we talked at the beginning sort of about teacher knowledge, teacher self-efficacy, right? So if you've empowered teachers to be able to use the knowledge that you've created this process where you've come up with your own proficiencies, and then being able to say, wow, we're actually going to take what you've done and worked on and shown that's going to work well, and we're going to measure it against that. So that's very nice. So it's honoring the work that you do, because sometimes you do that work and then you just don't do anything with it, right? Then it's like, oh, why did we spend time on that? Excellent. Okay. So, so anyway, this is the first grade one. I put it up so you can see. Again, every grade level had a lot of, they were a little bit all over the place, and it really did depend who we met with. And so it just became abundantly clear that we needed time to work on this. And so by the end of our, so we did 6 lunch and learn series, and so we provided lunch, and they came, and we did these were short. They were like a half an hour, and so we were able to finish them before school shut down. And then the coach and I were all excited and making this plan, because we talked to the teachers, like, what do we think we need to do? However, then the pandemic came, and then by that point, I was in a different position, and so I passed this on. But I don't know where they went in their principal. That a lot of change happened, right? The pandemic was just like a throw a bomb in a room type of thing. So a lot of things changed, and I actually miss working with these teachers, and I hope that they continued the work. But they at least started the thought process. So my hope was that even when they were teaching online, and again, I think they switched curriculums to do some sort of online curriculum. But the process is there, and I learned a lot in this process myself. And one of the things I had to learn as a coach was about administrator permission. So once the coach and I were doing this, we had found the misalignment, and I could have backed up and done this part first, but I wanted to let you know they found it was misaligned. So that's why I'm kind of going backwards. But I was thinking, oh my gosh, this is a new superintendent. They just spent all this money. I really kind of need to ask permission to do this lunch and learn series, because as an integrity as a coach, I can't just go in and pretend that it's fine. However, I know they just spent money on this, so it's kind of like a slippery slope of how do I do this and keep my integrity as a coach and what I know about literacy research. So I just talked to the superintendent and I said, hey, so by the way, I know that you just purchased this, but we're finding, the coach and I are finding, we just did 1 grade level's ideas, and here's what they said about the alignment to research and what the researchers are saying about writing. And so I just kind of need permission before we start really digging into this. I was like, I've been digging into it a lot, and I found a lot of things that we're gonna have to tweak or change, but I don't know what your stance is on that. So I'm just wondering if we can talk about it. And I was pleasantly surprised, because she said, well, what's best for the kids? I was like, well, that's amazing. So I said, well, what's best for the kids would definitely be to align it to the research so that they're doing work, they're receiving instruction that would be what we found in research to be effective. And she said, well, then you have my permission to go forward. And I was like, I want to hug you, and I wish every administrator would say that, right? So, but that was like a hard move, and so it could have gone the other way for me. So I just wanted to have you reflect for just a minute, and then we probably are going to end up closing our day here and giving you one of the rubrics to take home to look at tonight that we do have a hard copy of, and then we'll get into our work on that tomorrow, where we start to like have you think about alignment to the essentials. But take just a minute and maybe think about what you might do or who you would talk to and what you might say. And I'm not going to have you talk, but just sort of like think about that, and you can jot it down, and then I'll start going into what we're doing tomorrow. Okay, so as you're wrapping up your thought on that, we hope you'll take time to be able to think about how this, we're bringing this back to our work and trying to think about, in the lens of Goldie's inspiration, about how you might be thinking about your identity. As I shared with you, that curriculum conversation with that administrator was very much my identity. Like, I can't fake it. I'm just not good at that. So I knew I had to have that conversation. And also just be thinking about any of these questions for your intellect, criticality. I think this conversation around Haggerty I see as a big one that could be connected to criticality and making that change in the world that we know might be better for kids. Again, not saying we're throwing it out or burning it, just kind of like, what do we need to do for the kids in front of us? And hopefully there's a little joy. I heard a few laughs today, but maybe how this might make you feel joyful about thinking about the curricular process with us this year. But part of that is we want to find out what you're using so we can let you know who's using what that's in this room. So as you exit today, I just have like 2 pieces of paper on the door, and you can, flow in and out as you're reflecting on the day, go over there and kind of write whole curriculums that you're using right now and curricular resources that you're using. If it's already on there, you don't have to list it again, but what I'm going to do is like put those into a document and a Google form so we can find out, and then you'll know who in the space with you is also using these resources, so that way if you wanted to like reach out to someone in the group, you'll have that, or maybe you'll want to have your own conversations. And do also know that I'm going to also ask you what you've done before that you might want to share, because we already had some colleagues share some great things with us, and there'll be opportunities for you to highlight things you've done in your coaching, either here just with our group, maybe with the whole coaching network, whatever that is, but things that will be useful to the group. So on that note, Dr. Tortorelli is kindly handing out the hard copy of the Equip rubric. We will start with that process and doing some work together tomorrow on that. And tonight before you leave, really your only job, please, is to let us know the curricular resources you're using so that we can create a survey for you, and to just think about what brought you joy. And I hope that your afternoon is joyful. I think it's beautiful outside again, so have fun out on the town. And we'll see you back here tomorrow for breakfast at 7:30. So thanks.